How you doing? Wonderful to have you here. What I want to discuss in today's video is essentially Ananda's breakthrough. Ananda is the Buddha's close attendant, perhaps his closest attendant, his closest friend, if you like, during much of his career as a teacher. And there's an interesting story about Ananda, his attendant, and what the exact experience that allowed Ananda to understand the Dharma. If you're new to these videos, by the way, of mine, and are interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to this channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. Videos like this, videos about aspects of the Dharma of early Buddhism, taught from a contemporary perspective. So what we hear in this sutta that I'm going to be discussing in today's video is this time that Ananda came to an awareness and understanding of the Buddhist Dharma. At least that's how he describes it. Now, I did an earlier video on Ananda as a figure. I talked about his life. I'll leave a link to that video down below in the notes in case you want to see it after this one. But in any event, what this particular sutta we'll be discussing today talks about is the experience of what's called stream entry for Ananda. Now, so what is stream entry? Stream entry is the first of 4 stages along the path to enlightenment in the early tradition. It's the stage that is typified by the ending of doubt, among other things. I won't get into all of it. I have a video on that too. I'll leave that one in a link down below too. But basically, it's the ending of doubt. It's you see through a lot of concerns and questions that you have, and you come to a realization that this is the right path. In any event, Ananda says that when he was a newly ordained monastic, he was helped out by another monk named Punna Manantiputta. Punna is called by the Buddha the foremost speaker on the Dharma. Now, he wasn't the most wise, that would be Sariputta, but he was a wonderful speaker. In other words, he had a great ability to teach, we might say. And so, in any event, Punna seems to have taken Ananda under his wing to an extent, and gave him this instruction that we'll be discussing today. Now, before getting to that instruction, it's interesting to reflect on the fact that what this means is that when Ananda became ordained as a monastic, he was not yet a stream enterer. He was not yet over all of his doubts, which is interesting. It's an interesting thing to consider, especially considering how important Ananda was. So that when he was ordained, he still had doubts, he still was not really all there, and it makes us perhaps wonder why he decided to ordain in the first place. Now, traditionally, Ananda is believed to have been the Buddha's cousin, one of the Buddha's cousins, so it certainly is possible that he ordained because out of love or reverence or respect for his cousin. So he may have thought, okay, my cousin's doing something important here, let's ordain and see what's going on, without really completely understanding what the Buddha was talking about, and then Punna made it clear to him. Anyhow, we can look at this sutta and consider its ramifications. What Punna talks about is the creation of the self. Where does this I am come from? This notion I am. Punna says that it comes through clinging or grasping. What are the Pali word is upadaya. And not through non-clinging or non-grasping. Clinging and grasping here I'm using as synonyms. Basically it means the same thing. So but then clinging to what? Well, Punna talks about, for example, clinging to the body, clinging to our form. And here Punna gives an example. He talks about a young person who he says is fond of ornaments. He says that when they see themselves in the mirror, when they hold up a mirror, all of a sudden something happens. That this notion I am arises, that the clinging arises. He says, so too, it's by clinging to form that I am occurs, not without clinging. And I think that many of us can identify with this. I mean, literally identify with it. This is the problem. We're identifying ourselves with something else. We see ourselves in this example, just as we see ourselves in the mirror. And so let's go and break this down. That when we see our form in the mirror, something happens. If we're, let's say, a young person, perhaps we can think of ourselves as being interested in adornments and beauty and looking nice. We may see ourselves and a number of things happen. First of all, we identify with that thing in the mirror, that image in the mirror, as I exist, I am, I'm there, that's me. And we also identify in a certain sense, not just cognitively, but also emotionally, as we might think, oh, I'm looking really good today. We might think a positive kind of emotional grasping at something that we see in that mirror. Or we might think that we don't look so good today and that we need to change something. We feel a certain aversion towards what we see in the mirror, and so we react by thinking we have to change this or that or the other thing. Or alternately, that we have to do something to cover up whatever this thing is that we don't like. In past videos, I've gone through operations. I had an operation, in fact more than one, for basal cell carcinoma, for skin cancer, and did a video soon after that where I had some bandages on. In previous years, I hadn't done videos during that time, and sometimes you don't want to because it's kind of a turn-off. You have a bandage on your face, doesn't look good. Can you paper over it? Can you make it look good in some way temporarily so you can do a video? Or do you just leave it? These are questions that arise when we look at ourselves in the mirror. So when we see ourselves, what happens is that there arises a kind of a constellation of what we might call ego-directed thoughts, opinions, emotions, all of these things that are involved in creating the idea and the ideal of a self that we cling to, that we grasp at. That's where this idea I am comes from. Now, up until now, Punna has been talking only about the body, about clinging to the body, the physical form, but then he goes on and talks about the fact that we can cling to other things, for example, feelings, that is to say positive, pleasant and unpleasant feelings that we have. We can cling to perceptions, we can cling to our volitional formations, that is to say, our desire to do this or that, our will, or we can cling to consciousness. Now, all of these things I've just discussed are known as the 5 aggregates. I've done an earlier video on the 5 aggregates, which I'll leave a link to down below in the notes in case you haven't seen it or are unfamiliar with the concept, the 5 aggregates. But basically in early Buddhism, the 5 aggregates are a way that we divide up the self into parts. 4 mental parts and 1 physical part, the form, the physical form. And I think we can see with some examples how this might work. So let's take the example of pleasant and unpleasant feelings. Now, many of us, especially when we're young, we're addicted, as it were, to opinions, to things that we like and things that we don't like. Talk to somebody who's young about musical groups, about what kind of music they listen to. And all kinds of opinions will arise about they like this one, they hate that one. If you talk about some musical group, they'll have an opinion about it, almost certainly. That this musical group, that gives them pleasure to listen to. That one, they think it's disgusting, it's ugly, it's horrible, it's the sort of thing no one would want to listen to, even though it's very popular. Or about, let's say, sports, teams, that this team gives them pleasure, that one does not. And when it comes to perception, well, perception is very much the sort of thing also we can cling to. We can cling to how we see things. In Buddhism, perception is a cognitive ability that we have to recognize the way things are, to see things a certain way. And we can cling to that and think of it as ourselves or as who we are. And here again, we can think, you can think of people, let's say we have a television and we're seeing some sports game, some football game. And you have people from 2 different teams watching it. and a play occurs, people on one team are going to see a foul, and people on the other team are going to say, "What foul? I didn't see a foul. There's no foul there." It's the same, we're seeing the same information, but the perceptions are different. And people cling to that perception that that you have to have seen this foul. You're blind if you didn't see that foul. And the other person's saying, you're delusional. There was no foul there. This is the way that we can cling. This is one example of a way we can cling to our way of seeing things. Or we can cling to volitional formations. And here again, I think it's useful, as Punna talks about, to think about somebody in their youth, clinging to all kinds of ways that they like to act in the world. Of somebody wants to be feels themselves as being a dancer or a singer, an actor, or a geek, or a business person, a budding business person, wants to make money or wants to become famous. These things that people do that comes from their volition, their will. And when we're young, a lot of our mental energy is spent sort of trying to figure out which one of these things we want to cling to or identify with. The lucky, quote-unquote, lucky among us will know right away that this is something they want to do, and the quote-unquote less lucky among us will maybe take too long or take too much time and not really know which one they want to cling to because they like different things. In any event, we want to find where we can be most active, where we can find a job and make a living and so on. That's clinging to an aspect of our volitional formations. And finally, consciousness. Now, when it comes to clinging to consciousness, I would submit that most people don't really think of doing that. I think for the vast majority of people, they're going to cling to one of these other ones. But for the, shall we say, more spiritual or philosophical-minded among us, perhaps you're one of these, we may think of consciousness as kind of an inner sanctum, an inner controller, an inner seer of what's going on that somehow remains above the fray of change, and is who we really are. And a lot of people have thought of consciousness that way, and so we tend to cling to, if we think of it that same way, we may cling to it as who I am. That is, we think all these other things change, but I am my consciousness. Now, for the Buddha, all things change, including our consciousness, and so we shouldn't reify consciousness as a kind of an unchanging thing, but rather see it in its fullness of change, just with all of the other aspects of the body and the world that we've already discussed. And if this is something new to you, I have an earlier video on what's known as Sati's mistake, the mistake of an early monastic named Sati about consciousness. And I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen that yet. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look over at my Patreon page, which is linked down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel. Thanks so much to all of my patrons on Patreon. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video.